Hello, everybody. This is Miss Peachy from your WCA Biology B class, and today we are looking at Unit 7, Lesson 5, High Altitude Living. So this is a shorter lesson than the last one. Oops, I'm ahead of myself here, but our keywords are adaptations, allele, hemoglobin, genotype, and natural selection. So hopefully you've noticed that there are not as many new vocabulary words in this lesson as there was in our last. But it's interesting nonetheless. It's talking again about natural selection. And remember how natural selection is essentially how it's the mechanism of evolution. So, how it's one mechanism of evolution. It's how organisms change through time based upon different adaptations that better enable them to survive in their environment, to reproduce, and then be able to pass those adaptations through their genes on to the next generation, right? Those that have the adaptation are better equipped to survive. They're going to reproduce more often, more successful reproduction, and those adaptations get passed on from one generation to the next. Um, so then it talks about the Himalayan Mountains. And Mount Everest is very tall, it's the tallest mountain in the world. The people who live in and around this area, it's on the border between Tibet and Nepal, actually have adaptations that enable them to survive at higher altitudes. Most people who go and want to climb Mount Everest, for whatever reason, they would want to do that. I don't know, just because there, they said, I think to each his own. I'll stay on flat ground. But that when climbers reach high altitudes, they can get what's known as altitude sickness. Essentially, their blood does not have enough dissolved oxygen in it. You get very sick because your organs aren't getting enough oxygen. Some altitude sickness is mild. It can kind of give you, kind of make you a little bit ill and stuff like that. But there's an area known as the death zone. Again, why would you want to climb it? That climbers hit when they reach an altitude of about 8,000 meters above sea level. In the death zone, sorry, guys. It's called the death zone for crying out loud. The lungs and brains do not get enough oxygen, and the risk of stroke and heart attack increases, and judgment is impaired. However, those that are native to the Tibetan Plateau have adapted to living at high altitudes with lower oxygen levels and are able to help mountain climbers. So, what about them makes them better equipped to survive where people like you and I, flatlanders, can't possibly survive, or we could, but we know they do a lot of training and stuff to be able to actually make it up there. Generally, if you just start climbing, you're not going to do it, ladies and gentlemen. So they found that these Tibetans actually have a mutated gene. They have an allele that is being expressed that actually enables them to increase the oxygen saturation of their blood. So they're not like surviving on less oxygen, they're actually able to absorb and have a higher oxygen concentration in their blood altogether. Um, Let's see, they found that women who have the genotype for high oxygen saturation have more living children and lower death rates, which allows this gene to be passed from parent to offspring more efficiently. The gene that gives those native to the Tibetan Plateau the advantage is called the EPAS1 gene. This gene helps produce hemoglobin, which is protein that actually carries oxygen in the blood, and it provides instructions for a protein that plays a role in the body's ability to adapt to changing oxygen levels. The protein also controls cell division, forming new blood cells and making new red blood cells. So I'm assuming that there's more hemoglobin, more red blood cell production, therefore higher oxygen concentration in your blood. Cool, pretty interesting. And again, it's one of these kind of mutations that we're not going to outwardly see a huge difference between the people that live in the Tibetan Plateau and the Han Chinese people who live in the lowlands of Mount Everest, who are ancestors or from whom the Tibetans are um, descendants of. Like outwardly, they would look very much alike. That's not going to provide you with much of a, you wouldn't really see it, but there's a physical adaptation here, right? This is an actual adaptation. So the scientists concluded when they studied the people, the Han Chinese, who again are the ancestors of those living in the Tibetan Plateau, that the EPA-S1 gene was not prevalent in the Han Chinese population. That this mutation increased in frequency, allele increased in frequency. Well, increase in allele frequency, that sounds like evolution. It is, right? Because of it's through natural selection. It provided them with an advantage. They didn't die as much because you know what? They could get more oxygen. They could live in this higher altitude. It enabled them to survive in an environment which they couldn't survive before. One of the first things that is I ask in the note sheet that goes along with this is um, what types of adaptations are there? And let's see, they can be anatomical, how the organism is built. They can be behavioral, types of behaviors, migration, mating dances, things like that. Physiologically, how the organism functions. That's the whole thing with the protein in the blood. So those are potential types of adaptations. I often will just say physical and behavioral, but that physical can be structural, which is the anatomical part, or functional, which is the physiological part. So, this is evidence of natural selection in humans. People often get kind of caught up in the fact that natural selection automatically means speciation, and it doesn't. Just because speciation can happen with natural selection doesn't mean it always leads to speciation or that it's only result of natural selection. Natural selection changes allele frequencies in populations. And eventually, if two populations become different enough from each other, speciation does happen. But it doesn't always happen, and it's not the only way in which natural selection can occur. That's pretty much the gist of this, you guys. There's questions in here again, practice, a video on high altitude living, more practice questions. Um, Kind of just more talking about a little bit about that gene and how it works, that different allele, and that's essentially kind of the gist of this lesson. So I think I'm going to end my video here. If you have any additional questions, let me know. Otherwise, guys, I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.